Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, everybody. It's Pat DeCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world. Has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the people that come on the show. Today, we're with Rod Sommer. Rod is a friend that I met at a ACEC conference, the American Council of Engineering Companies, a while back. And he is the CEO of LJB Engineering, which he joined in 2000 and became CEO in 2013. Rod has 33 years of management experience in engineering and architectural consulting and has 10 years of marketing and sales experience in a variety of educational and broadcasting firms. He has also served as a board member for more than a dozen nonprofit and for-profit organizations. On the personal side, Rod and his wife Jennifer first met at a speed dating event and have been married for 19 years. They made a decision to forego children in favor of pets, namely dogs and cats, and traveling around the U.S. and the world. Rod and Jennifer live in Dayton, Ohio, which is the birthplace of aviation, and they also enjoy a home in Lake Barkley, located in Cadiz, Kentucky. Rod graduated from the University of Dayton in 1983 and continues to be a big UD Flyer basketball fan. And description of his firm, LJB is a national engineering firm and a portfolio company of Copley Equity Partners. The company is committed to improving the quality of life through the delivery of transportation, civil, structural, and water resources engineering, as well as geospatial and safety services for a variety of public and private clients. Welcome, Rod.
Well, Pat, it's great to be with you, sir. I remember the lunch we had, and we met, and we were talking about this, and here we are. It's magic.
Thanks for making the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So you told me a little bit about your background, but I'd like to know your earliest memories. What do you remember from when you were a small child?
Sure. The early days of Rod, well, I've always lived in and around the Dayton, Ohio area. Excuse me. And grew up in a small town called Brookville, Ohio, a small village northwest of Dayton. And grew up in the country. We weren't on a farm. Our property wasn't a farm, but we were next to a farm. We had cows right next to us. That was always fun as a child. Probably earliest memories are of my father working around the house, fixing things, improving things. My father was an electronics engineer. He passed away about 5 years ago, but he was electronics engineer, very skilled, very bright man, very hardworking, and he loved to do things around the house, do-it-yourself projects, and learned a lot from him through that process as a young child. Mm-hmm. Started at a Catholic grade school and was bused from Brookville to that grade school. It was about 8 miles from our home, and so there was somewhat of a disconnect between us and the rest of the town, my brother and I. So as we were bused to a Catholic grade school, but my parents had good foresight, and they made sure that my brother and I both joined the Boy Scout troop and played Little League baseball, those kind of things, to stay connected and make friends in the community. So those are really my earliest memories. Getting dressed up, and my mom would dress us up and go to church on Sundays. I remember that. We have a lot of family photos of that. That's about it, Pat, as far as my early days.
Mm-hmm. So you played Little League?
Yeah, I did. I loved baseball. Played Little League baseball. I think as every kid who played baseball, you dreamed of a major league career. But I will tell you that my teen years were in the mid 70s. And of course, if you're familiar with Major League Baseball, that was the time of the Big Red Machine, right? The Cincinnati Reds, and
Mm-hmm.
with Pete Rose and Joe Morgan and Johnny Bench and Tony Perez and David Concepcion and that whole group that won back-to-back World Series in 75, 76. So it was a great time to be a teenager, great time to love baseball and play baseball. But those are some great memories of that time of my life.
I think, was it 76 when the Big Red Machine swept the Yankees?
It was. They beat Boston. I think it was a 6 or 7 game series in '75,
Mm-hmm.
and then swept the Yankees in '76.
Mm-hmm.
Four straight games.
Yeah, that was a sad time for me.
No, Pat, it was a great time.
It was a
Great time for us in Southwest Ohio.
No doubt. um, so you went to high school in the Catholic school as well, or you went back to public school?
No, actually, the Catholic school was just up through 8th grade, so
Okay.
came back to Brookville for high school, Brookville High School, public school. A little bit of a culture shock, if you ever spent time in a Catholic grade school back in the '60s and '70s. It was I'd say 75% of my teachers were nuns,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very, very strict environment. Strict by meaning you stood in single file line from class to class. You didn't roam the halls. You got in line, single file line, waiting to go into the next classroom. You wore the uniform every day. Everybody was dressed the same. The boys and the girls, the white shirt, the blue pants, the tie. Um, so when I went to high school, it was interesting, right? You go to a public high school and it was like culture shock. Everybody's wearing jeans. They're wearing flannel shirts. They're meandering around the hall. They're not in single file lines. So it took a couple of days to reset and realize that wow, this is a whole other world. And actually, it's a much better world as a kid. So that's my memory of going to high school.
Mm-hmm. Were you an athlete in high school as well?
Somewhat. Um, I played freshman basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if it tells you how bad our freshman basketball team was, I'm 5'6", 5'6.5", and I was the starting power forward for my freshman high school basketball team. So that tells you how bad we were when you have a power forward at 5'6". So that was the end of my basketball career. I had played soccer all through grade school. Catholic grade school didn't have money for football, so we all played soccer. And my high school at that time did not have a soccer team. It wasn't mid '70s, mid late '70s. It wasn't quite um, in the system yet in the U.S. So I played in some spring leagues with some old colleagues of mine from grade school. So I actually played soccer up until I was 40 years old. Um, Played in some outdoor leagues until I was 30, some amateur leagues, and then played indoor soccer for 10 years between the ages of 30 and 40. But when you're in a 30 and over league, Pat, when you're in a 30 and over league and you're 40, you realize that you're 10 years older than most of the other people playing, and it's time to hang up the shoes. So,
I
yeah,
know a lot of
love
people.
sports. Love sports growing up.
Mm-hmm. So you graduated high school and ended up going to the University of Dayton.
Correct. Yeah, I had applied to several schools in and around the Southwest Ohio area. Um, got accepted at all of them. A lot of my close friends from high school were going to University of Dayton, so I decided to pick UD and join them. Commuted our first year. Three friends of mine and myself, we commuted, and then our sophomore year, we were able to rent a home in the off-campus area, lovingly known as the ghetto, the University of Dayton ghetto. They hate it when you refer to it that way, but it was. And lived in that house sophomore, junior, senior year. So we were able to stay in that private house for about 3 years, which was great. But yeah, went to UD. Started out in pre-med. All of my friends were in engineering, electrical engineering, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and even though my dad had been an engineer, electronics engineer, and my friends were very interested in engineering, I was not. And so I wanted to be a professional, so I went pre-med my first year. Did well in the program. Got really good grades, but I'll never forget, Pat. I was sitting in a chemistry class with a pair of twins, or twins, not a pair of twins, but two gentlemen, the Strebels, John and Jim. And their older brother was a dentist. Their father was a dentist. They had a history of dentistry in their family. And they became friends of mine. And I just saw how passionate they were about being a dentist and being a doctor. And I said to myself, I don't have that passion that they have. And I think if you're going to go into a career, you better have passion about what you're doing. So I didn't see myself going through 4 years of undergrad and then 3 to 4 years of med school and then ongoing education to be a doctor. So I switched majors at that time.
Understood. How did you decide on what you wanted to do from there?
Well, like all 18, 19-year-olds, Pat, it was well thought through and researched. Not. Actually, my freshman year, I was taking an elective at UD. You had your major, but then you had to take an elective or several electives as part of a liberal arts education. And I took a speech class my freshman year, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and I was actually pretty good at it, giving speeches, and great professor at that time. And he encouraged me to stay that path and really look at a communications career. So that's the path I took. I transitioned to the School of Arts and Sciences and majored in communications with a concentration in broadcasting. So actually, my degree was in broadcasting, and great experience at that part of my life, and honestly thought that was going to be my career going forward.
And so you graduated Dayton, and then you got a job in that industry. Is that right?
Well, yeah, great question. Actually, it was a unique situation, Pat, at the University of Dayton back at that time, back in the late 70s, early 80s. The University of Dayton actually owned a 50,000 watt commercial FM radio station. Somebody had donated this frequency. It was 99.9 on the FM dial. They had donated that frequency to the university. And the stipulation that the donor put on the university's ownership of that radio frequency is that they could run the station commercially. They could make money off of that station. But all of the on-air talent had to be students. So the students could use that for training to prepare them for their careers in broadcasting. So that station was called WVUD, stood for the Voice of UD, the Voice of the University of Dayton. But again, a 50,000 watt FM station, had an incredible reputation, a national reputation for producing some fantastic radio talent. As a matter of fact, Dan Patrick from ESPN fame came up through UD and WVUD. A lot of very famous broadcasters, both radio and TV, came through WVUD. So my senior year, I had the opportunity to get a job there at the radio station on campus, and so that was actually my senior year, first job there. Graveyard shift, 2 to 6 a.m. Tuesday and Wednesday night. And the beauty of that, Pat, was not only the hours were fantastic, but you got to do it for no pay whatsoever. That
Mm-hmm.
was glorious. That was glorious. But you learned in that business, right? You had to pay your dues, and
Mm-hmm.
every hour you could get in the chair behind a microphone, it was a good day. So started working there my senior year, and then the station brought in a new program manager from the outside. He was a fairly well-known radio personality in Dayton, a gentleman named Mike McMurray. He joined the station, and he needed he was going to do the morning drive show, and he needed a sidekick, right? He needed his news guy, his right-hand man, and got to know Mike, and he actually chose me to be his sidekick on air. I'm young, I'm not even out of college yet, and I've got a great job in morning drive on a 50,000 watt FM station with a guy who's really well known. He was 20 years older than me at the time. I'm in my early 20s. He's right around 40, 41. And we had a great run. So when I graduated, I already had a job, right? So that turned into a full-time job. I became the news director of WVUD. And Mike and I enjoyed a 4-year career on air in
Mm.
Dayton.
So he was your mentor, and I think you told me that he advised you on your career.
Yeah, yeah, he did. It's a great little story. Getting up at 10 till 4 every day, 3:50 a.m. For 4 years, and in many cases, going home after that, getting off the air at 9 a.m., going home, catching a few hours of sleep, coming back and doing it again in the afternoon drive from 2 to 6. Those were the days. But yeah, Mike and I became really close friends. When you're in a studio one on one with somebody for 4 years, between the hours of 5 and 9 a.m., you just get to know that person really well. So Mike was a great friend, great mentor. Um, the thing he taught me about radio, I'll never forget this. Our first day on the air together, we were um, we were doing our thing, and I guess I was being a little too formal or playing a little too much radio. So we got into a commercial break or a song was playing, and he takes the mic off, and he says, "Hey Rod, do me a favor." He says, "Just talk to me. You're here because of who you are, and I want you in the studio." He says, "Quit playing radio and just talk to me and be yourself."
Mm.
And that seems like very simple advice, but very hard in your early days of radio. And that advice, I think I've carried through my entire life of just be in the moment and be yourself and be happy with who you are, be happy with how your voice sounds, and just enjoy life and not try to pretend to be something you're not. So that was a great lesson I learned from Mike McMurray. But 4 years into our time together, we got off the air. We grabbed a cup of coffee, and he shocked me by saying, "Hey Rod, I love you, man." He says, "I've enjoyed these 4 years." He says, "But you've got too much on the ball. You've got too much on the ball." He says, "You need to get the hell out of this business."
Mm.
And I'm like, "You're kidding, Mike. I mean, I thought it was going to be TV, radio, and on and on." And he says, "Rod," he says, "I don't want you to end up like me."
Mm.
And I'll never forget that day and that sentiment that he saw something in me that, he was in his mid 40s by that time. That's all he knew how to do. He was really good at it. But he said, "Rod, the money is terrible. There's no stability in this industry. And as you know, the hours are horrible." So he talked me into leaving the broadcasting business. And I thank him for that, right? He passed away several years back, but we stayed friends up until the year he passed away.
Mm-hmm. So what happened then?
Well, I had because the radio station was actually commercially run with professional salespeople, professional accounting, and all that, but it was located on campus. So we would frequently eat in the staff dining room, and I actually a guy who was a listener of our program a gentleman named Mike Whalen, was a fan of the show, and he was in the advancement office. He was a associate director of development at the University of Dayton, and became friends with Mike. And we were just talking one day that, hey, Mike, I was looking to transition from the broadcasting business, and didn't know if he had any thoughts or any ideas. And he said, well, Rod, he says, I've got the perfect job for you. He says, we're looking for a third associate director of development in the development office, in the advancement office. He goes, I think you'd be perfect. He says, you can sell, because I sold radio advertising at the same time I was on air, simply to make ends meet because the money was so bad. So I had some sales experience. And he says, look, he says, you're an alumnus, you love the university. I think you'd do great. So he got me an interview with the director of development, and that same day he hired me. And so I transitioned to being an advancement officer, development officer for the University of Dayton. That was probably around 1986.
And how long were you involved in development or fundraising?
That was about a 2-year stint,
Mm.
uh, Pat. So, yeah, what happened? I guess you know, a lot of people ask me, how did you go, Rod, from broadcasting career to running an engineering consulting firm?
Mm-hmm.
And there were really two steps along the way. First was the transition to university development work. I managed the Parents Association, the President's Club, corporate foundation fundraising. Met a lot of people. Met a lot of people throughout that process. And one of the administrative assistants in that department on campus became friends with her and her husband. Her husband was a partner with a local engineering firm in Dayton, and we used to do things together. I was single at the time. They were always trying to fix me up with people they knew and friends they knew, and so I'd go out and do social things with Bill and Jackie Love, their names, and I got to know Bill Love pretty well, who was the partner at a local engineering firm. And I would say, Pat, this is kind of an interesting story. Probably not fascinating, but interesting, of
Mm-hmm.
how I made the jump into the architectural engineering world as a broadcasting major. Bill had invited me. Bill and Jackie had invited me to a dinner party. Bill was a fairly large man. He loved to eat. And he invited me to this dinner party with a private chef. He was going to do a private event. And Bill, of course, there's maybe 25, 30 people in the room. And Bill knew everybody, and I knew nobody. So he goes off flitting around, meeting his friends, talking to his friends. And I'm at this one end of the table with about 10 people around me. And I just started introducing myself to everybody at the table and getting to know them and asking them questions, about
Mm.
where they work, how many kids they have, blah, blah, blah. So this goes on for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then Bill Love he comes by and sees me. He goes, hey, Rod, sorry to leave you hanging. He goes, let me introduce you to my friends. And I said, don't worry about it, Bill. I said, I took care of it. I said, I know everybody here at this end of the table. And he goes, no, you don't. He goes, that's BS. He says, you don't know these people. He says, tell me who they are then. Tell me who they are. And I was able to go around that table and just, well, that's Mary and Jeff. They've been married 17 years. They live in Oakwood. They have 3 kids. And Jeff works at blah, blah, blah. And I was able to go around the table and do that. And he just kind of looked at me and smirked and just kind of shook his head like, I'll be damned. So, so fast forward to the next day, Pat.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, I get a phone call from Bill Love, and he says, Rod, he says, I have a proposition for you. He says, how about I teach you enough about architecture and engineering to be dangerous, and you come teach my architects how to sell? And I thought, well, this is interesting. I'm 28 at the time. I'm still single, and we had just finished up a major campaign at the university. So a lot of the development officers were leaving to go to the next campaign at another school. So I said, you know what? I'll give it a whirl, Bill. I'm curious, right? I'm curious and interested. So I went to that firm. It was called Wolpert, a very large firm today, great firm, Wolpert, Woolpert. Went to Wolpert, working with the architects and landscape architects. And my job there was to sell for them and teach them how to sell.
How long were you at Wolpert?
A total of 10 years had at Wolpert.
Mm-hmm.
Started out, like I said, working with the architects and landscape architects. Then was asked by the chief operating officer at the time, really liked what we were doing. The planning group and the environmental services group had been added to Bill Love's palette of control. And the CEO, after about 5 years, came and said, "Hey, Rod, hey, how would you like to do what you've been doing for this group? How would you like to do it for the company as a whole?"
Mm.
And seized that opportunity, was thrilled to be asked. So I became the kind of the director of corporate business development and kind of set up that program, set up that department for Wolpert. This was back through the 90s. So I was at Wolpert probably from 88 to 97 when I made a decision to leave. Actually left the industry, Pat. I left the engineering architectural industry. It's a fascinating industry, but several things were happening in my life. One was I had gotten married back in the early 90s, and I was going through a divorce, a very short-lived marriage. So if you ever had that experience, right, it kind of makes you think about your life and think about change. So I was going through a divorce. There was an ownership transition happening at the firm, and there was some uncertainty about who was going to be leading the charge in this change of ownership. So there was some uncertainty there that I wasn't real comfortable with. And the third item is I had another job offer, a job opportunity at that time. So I was sitting on the board of the local public television station. I had gone through Leadership Dayton in the early 90s and was the class representative for that group. And there was a seat on the local public television station board for that individual. So was on that board when Newt Gingrich, if you remember Newt, when he was Speaker of the House,
Mm-hmm.
he was always on the warpath to try to eliminate federal funding for public broadcasting. And as a board, we were talking about, well, what impact would that have to the station? And it was about $1 million. We had about a $7 million operating budget at that time, and it was $1 million hit if we lost federal funding. And the question was, how do we replace that revenue, right? If this happens. And the idea floated around at the board meeting was, well, why don't we use the assets of the station to actually generate revenue? We had the largest studio in town. We had directors, producers, writers. We had satellite uplink, downlink. We had editors. We had the assets to do pretty high-end video production. And the studio sat dark most of the time. So the idea was, let's carve that piece out and actually make it a for-profit entity and generate revenue for the station. Well, the board thought that was a great idea. The president thought it was a great idea. But he said, well, we don't have anybody here who knows how to do that. So that got me thinking, well, I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting on the board. So, the things that were happening at my other job with the change of ownership, divorce, and I saw that this was a great opportunity for me, kind of going back to my broadcasting roots, involved in setting up a business, involved in sales and development. So I went to the president and said I'd be willing to come off the board and come onto staff and set up that department. So that's what I did. And that's when I transitioned to the public television stations in Dayton. Went through a whole identity review. This was at the time when digital technology was replacing analog, and a lot of marketing needs in the industry, and it was a fun time. So generated a lot of revenue, generated a lot of donors, corporate donors, and enjoyed that. That was about 3 years of my life. got me up to about 2000,
Mm-hmm.
which is when I made the transition, Pat, back into the engineering architectural business and came to LJB.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did they find you?
That's a great question. So early in my career at Wolpert, I had mentored a young marketing coordinator. Her name was Kimberly Eisenson,
Mm-hmm.
and she was with another firm in town, and I had mentored her. And it turned out that many years later, she was now at LJB, and the president of LJB, Mark Thompson, uh, had just become president the year before. The first full-time dedicated president that LJB had ever had. Firm had been around since 1966, but never had a full-time dedicated president until 1999, almost 33 years into the firm's existence. Um, and Mark was talking to Kimberly about he felt that the firm needed to establish a marketing department and bring in some sales management. And she said, "Well, Mark, you need to talk to Rod Sommer. He's set that program up at Wolpert. He's out of the industry, but I'm sure he'll talk to you. You can pick his brain." And so Mark called me and introduced himself as being referred by Kimberly. And as a favor to Kimberly, I said, "Mark, I didn't know Mark at the time." I said, "Happy to have lunch with you, Mark." And so we go to have lunch, and we're at a country club and sitting across the table from each other. I'll never forget this. And Mark is trying to describe his problems to me, the problems he's having and the challenge he's having at the firm. And I'm basically finishing his sentences for him because
Mm-hmm.
I understand. And he stops and he says, "Rod, I'm not going to do this because it would be weird." He says, "But I'd really love to lean across the table and hug you because," he says, "because you understand my problems." And I said, "Mark, I do." I said, "But I'm not coming back to the dark side, Mark. I'm not coming back to the dark side." We had a long conversation about what I meant by the dark side. And
Mm.
some of my earlier experiences, I just thought the industry was pretty crazy. And so uh, he was a wise man. Mark was a very wise man, and he didn't take no for an answer. He actually hired me as a consultant, moonlighting. I worked with him and his executive committee to kind of develop the framework for what a marketing department should look like and what its priorities should be. And after several months of working with his team, he comes to me and says, "So, are you ready to come on board and run this for us?" And I had to admit that he had sucked me in back. He had sucked
Mm.
back to the dark side. So that's why I jumped from public television to LJB. That was back in 2000. As you said in your intro of me, I've been here. This is my 24th year. Spent 8 years as the marketing director, sales manager. 4 years running the facilities division, structural engineering group here at the firm. 5 years doing that through the Great Recession, which was a great learning time. Great learning time. Tough years, but learned a lot about profit center management. And then Mark surprised everybody, Pat. In 2013, Mark had been with the firm 30 years. He had hired me 13 years earlier, and he pulled me into his office one day and slid his resignation across the table. And I'm just like shocked. I'm like, "You're kidding me, Mark." And he decided to actually retire from the industry. He wasn't going to a competitor. Mark was a structural engineer, a very good one, but he also had his MBA and he loved business. And he decided he wanted to be a small business consultant more than he wanted to be an engineer or the CEO of an engineering firm. So Mark transitioned his career to being a small business consultant, which opened up the CEO position at LJB. Honestly, Pat, I never thought I was going to be the CEO here.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't planning on it. Mark and I were about the same age. I thought we'd be tracking out together. And but I will tell you that I knew I was in the succession plan. I knew I was in the heartbeat away plan and the potential succession plan. So I took that seriously, right? I went and got my an MBA, an executive MBA certificate, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Probably nobody was closer to Mark than I was at that time, and I understood what the job entailed. So, long story very very short is threw my hat in the ring. There were a few other folks that were vying for the CEO position, but in a weak moment, I like to say, Pat, in a weak moment, my partners at that time voted me into that position back in 2013, and that's where I've been for the past 11 years.
That's a great story.
But it's a track. I go back and speak to a lot of I speak to high school students and college students, and they always ask, about the plan. How do you plan your career? And I say, you really don't. I, my advice to people is keep your eyes open, be curious, get to know as many people as you can possibly know, and really get to know them, right? Not just acquaintances, but get to know people, and keep your eyes and ears open for opportunities. Because I will say, Pat, I've never used a resume to get a job in my life. As you
Mm-hmm.
hear my story, right? It's always I'm meeting people who present opportunities. They just see me in that role, or you could do this job. And so I've just all of my transition has really been self-made, and I love that, right? It's not for everybody, but I love it. I love that challenge of creating something new. And I've done that. I think becoming the CEO of LJB was the first time I actually replaced anybody in an existing role, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm. That's fascinating.
Mhm.
So when you first took over as CEO, what was that like?
It was a challenge, candidly, Pat, because if you know which I know you do, you have a lot of clients and friends in the engineering architectural business. To be a non-engineer, a non-technical professional at the helm of an engineering firm is not always viewed positively by the engineers. There was a legacy belief that you had to be an engineer, you had to be a PE, professional engineer, to run an engineering firm. Um, I never believed that. I've never been one to hang on registrations or even degrees. Doesn't really matter what degree you have in college to run a business. There's a lot of other factors in running a business, but I knew I could do it. Um, I was confident that I could do it. I knew there was a lot I had to learn to build credibility among the team. Now, obviously, I had enough credibility to be voted in by the voting partners, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they saw that I had that potential. But I will say I knew that there was a lot that I didn't know, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember we had all the candidates for the CEO position at that time had to write a white paper, a short white paper talking about how you'd approach the job, what your priorities were for the business, what would stay the same, what would change. And one of the comments I made in there was the CEO has got to be the chief learning officer of the organization, right? It, Learning at the top is key and critical. So I started going to a variety of CEO forums, engineering CEO forums around the country. There were a number of advisory firms, M&A brokers that host CEO forums, and started going to those 2, 3 a year, and got to learn, right? Learn from my peers, learn from their mistakes, panel discussions, side conversations, dinner conversations. So that's one thing I'll say, Pat, about my life and my career is I learn better from other people. I learn from other folks better than I learn in a classroom environment. I like to read books, and I do read books, but I'd prefer to talk to people and meet people from different walks of life and different careers, and just learn how they tick and what they do and how they do it, and see how much of that I can apply to my life. And so that was the real value of those forums. And I learned that LJB was really at a crossroads. And Mark Thompson knew this at the time when he was president. We were at the crossroads that a lot of firms in our industry face, and that is, are you going to stay a practice, right, a professional practice, or are you going to transition to become a business and truly operate as a business? And that is a tough, tough transition mentally, emotionally for engineering firms, especially a firm like LJB. We were, this was, so we were over 40 years, 45 years we'd been around. And we had never really grown geographically. We were very much a Southwest Ohio firm. And when I stepped in 2013, I outlined all of this for the partners when I ran for the job, that we had to grow geographically. We had to expand geographically and expand our service offerings. And we've done that, right? Not easy. Not everything worked. We've made mistakes along the way, but we've pivoted. But we're now down in Texas. We're all through the Carolinas. Just made a nice acquisition of a firm that does water resources work for the Class 1 railroads around the country. So we're a true national firm today. And I can say 10 years ago, we absolutely were not a national firm. But again, working through others, learning from others, building the team around you, recognizing your personal strengths. And this may be controversial for some people, but I'm not a fan, Pat, of working on weaknesses. I have weaknesses, and I can spend a lot of time getting better at my weaknesses, or I can hire people who are really, really good at that, right? And let them do that and let me focus at what I'm really, really good at. So if you build a team where everybody's leveraging their strengths and not their weaknesses, that's where the magic happens. So I think that self-awareness of knowing what you're really good at and what you're not good at. So I don't spend a lot of time on weaknesses. I hire people who are strong at it. So I'll pause there.
There's this consultant in Canada by the name of Dan Sullivan who has this concept he calls unique ability. And he says, once you find your unique ability, that's all you should do. And it's interesting, should one be an inch wide and a mile deep, or or the opposite? And you could argue it both ways, but I've always been sort of a student of what you're saying. Been an expert in a very narrow area and tried to complement that with people that were good at the stuff I wasn't good at.
Absolutely. It's I boil it down to very simple terms. It's you're either working on your business or you're working in your business. And that's what I've seen. I've spent 34 years now in the engineering architectural consulting business. And I've seen a lot, right? I've seen a lot. I've met a lot of people, worked with a lot of people. And to me, management's role, true management, leadership's role in a firm is to be working on the business, looking to the future and making the firm more efficient and better in the right markets, being sustainable. But you need the engineers, the technical professionals, the architects, the environmental scientists. You need folks working in the business, doing what they do very, very well. And what I've seen with a lot of firms is the ownership or the leadership came up through the ranks and they have a hard time separating. And I get it, a hard time separating working in the business or on the business. They're still managing projects, they're managing clients, they're coming in on the weekends to help design stuff. And it's like, I was never able to do that, Pat, because I'm a broadcaster, right? I'm not an engineer. So, hey, I'd come in on weekends and I work late, but I'm working on the business. I'm not working in the business, right? And so I guess it's worked for us, right? It is working for us, and we've made a real transition here at LJB. Brought on a private equity partner a year and a half ago. We had been growing 20% a year for about 6 years, primarily organically, and that's 2 to 3 times the industry average. And that got the attention of private equity, and we wanted to continue to grow at that pace. And we also knew we had some ownership transition challenges. We were privately held, independently owned, and we weren't going to be able to maintain that ownership structure and continue to grow at the pace we were growing. It just was going to turn upside down. So we collectively made the decision to go with private equity, and it was a great decision, a great company, Copley Equity Partners, and we're in a really good place right now. Things are going very well for us.
Mm-hmm. How did you meet them, Copley Equity Partners?
Um, Another great question, Pat. They actually found us. Uh, Interestingly, we had an outside board, which was another unusual thing for a privately held firm. We had adopted a majority outside board. We had a 7-person board. 4 of them came from the outside. They had no ownership stake in the company, and it was a fiduciary board. That was counsel we had received from a business consultant, and we adopted that, gosh, back in 2009. So we had been working under that form of governance for 13 years. I had been on the board since the beginning of the board, and we knew we had this ownership transition challenge, right, Pat? We knew it was going to turn upside down, and we started exploring other options. In ESOP, for example, um, expanding ownership. We looked at a myriad options, and we entertained some private equity interest throughout like a 3-year window. I probably talked to 3 different private equity companies, and we received initial offers, but nothing really moved the needle for us. Just didn't feel right. So we had been looking for 3 years, but never in a process, right? We never actually hired anybody to go to market. Well, it turns out that Copley had spent that same 3-year window looking to get into the architectural engineering space.
Hmm.
They saw it as they like to focus on professional services, and they knew it was a strong market. So they had been doing their due diligence on the market. And what I understand is they talked to like 250 firms
Oh, geez.
over the course of 3 years. And I received a call probably March, April of 2022 from an associate at Copley, and you know how it goes, Pat, with these private equity calls. I was getting 3 or 4 calls a week, and the person answers. We answer the phone. The person says, "Hey, Rod," he says, "I've been researching your business, and I think we'd be a great partner for you." And I'd say, "Oh, okay, Jim, tell me about my business. If you've been researching us,
Mm.
tell me about our firm." Well, you're in the transportation business. Him and Han. I said, look, let's save each other a lot of time, right? If you actually do your research, if you want to do your research and you think it is a good fit, call me back. But I'm going to hang up. We're not going to waste each other's time. But the call from Copley was very, very different. They had clearly done their research, and they were looking for a certain kind of firm, and we checked a lot of boxes for them. So I think we came to an agreement really, really early on that this was a perfect marriage, because we knew we wanted to go family office private equity, and they were looking for an engineering firm that had proven its ability to grow, operated like a business, wanted it to continue to grow, and had a strong management team. So long story very short, it just made sense. So they actually called us. I found them just by answering a phone call.
Wow. That's
Mhm.
impressive.
Okay.
And back to your story about sort of the non-traditional management, at least from a marketing standpoint of your firm.
Mhm.
Like, I think it's such a huge issue. I mean, sales is important for all of us, clearly. And in order to
Absolutely.
demonstrate our capabilities, we need to lower the resistance to our existence. In other words, if you'll allow me to communicate, maybe we can have a conversation,
Hmm.
where you can see my capabilities. And like, there's so much talent in these engineering and architecture firms, but
Without a doubt.
lots of them never get to the table. They can't even tell their story because they lack the kind of management perspective and communication skills and sales skills that are
Yep.
necessary to break down initial barriers to
Yep.
entry. And so I
True.
almost think it's a paradox, of course, but you said it. You're better off not being trained as
Yeah.
an engineer because
Yeah.
it's a wonderful training, but it's a
Hmm.
limiting. It can limit your field of view.
Yeah. I've actually, you're spot on. I've actually said I'm not burdened with being an engineer.
Right.
Honestly.
But you could say
Right.
that right about anything, right? It's
Yeah.
a blessing and a
Yeah.
curse, no matter what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I've said too, and I mean this, I guess it's true. I've dedicated my career to helping engineers learn how to communicate their value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because engineers are phenomenal, right? I mean, my dad was an engineer, did amazing things
Mm-hmm.
as an electronics engineer. Um, and all my friends, right, were engineers in college, and now I work with engineers. I love engineers. I love what engineers do. They're super bright. No 2 days are ever alike. Some people don't like that, but every day is a new journey in this business, and I love that. I love change. I love facilitating change, change for the better, and but yeah, helping engineers learn how to communicate their value because there is so much value that they offer to
Mm-hmm.
the world, right? And
and and it's
it,
exasperating and
yeah,
humiliating not to be able to talk about it.
it is. It is. They're the most humble. I don't know the generalities, right? But
Mm-hmm.
a very humble class of people, right? Engineers, they don't like to manage each other a lot of times because, well, uh, Jim's just as smart as me. Why would I be Jim's manager?
Mm-hmm.
We're both brilliant, right? And it's like, well, yeah, but somebody has to manage somebody, right?
Right.
It's it's
Mm-hmm.
but it's that humble nature of I'm really not better than other people, and that's not fair for me to claim I am. I'm like, it's not that you're better, it's just a role in the firm that somebody needs to do.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I've enjoyed it, Pat. I've enjoyed it tremendously. I've enjoyed my career. We're at like I say, a great place right now, and I can look back on my legacy, if you will, and feel really really good about what I've been able to accomplish, and just leaving everything I've touched a little bit better is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the legacy thing for me. It's have I added value and left it better, and be willing to step aside. Be willing to step aside when you know it's your time to step aside. When I ran for the CEO role back 11 years ago, I closed that session by saying, you'll never have to fire me, team. You'll never have to fire me because I will know before any of you whether or not this job has gotten beyond me,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'll know, and I will willingly step aside. Probably
Mm-hmm.
not out, but I would step aside and let other talent, whether it's younger talent, smarter talent, I would let new talent come in and take this role before I'd let it damage the firm. So I think they were relieved to know that they'd never have to fire me. And,
Mm-hmm.
I still live by that today, right? I'll keep doing this job as long as I provide the value that the firm needs. And the time it comes for me to step aside, um, no harm, no foul. Uh,
Mm. So between now and what I call the horizon, uh, where do you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing? What professional and personal goals do you have?
um, it's pretty simple for me right now, Pat. About a year ago, a little more than a year ago, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer and
Mm.
caught it early. Um, and she had surgery, and it looks like they got it all. They've controlled it, but you know how it is with cancer, Pat. You just never know, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think I've heard from some doctors we all carry around precancerous cells in our body, and it could happen to anybody anytime. But my wife's living it, and I think our later years, I think when it comes time for me to step aside, I probably will truly step aside, right, and spend time with my wife. We love to travel, right? As you mentioned in the intro, dogs, cats, and traveling. We've traveled around the world, around the country. I've got 49 of the 50 states, Pat. I need
Mm.
South Dakota. I need South Dakota. So
I have a
need to go
friend
see.
there in Pierre,
Oh
South
well,
Dakota.
let's talk. Let's talk offline.
Alrighty.
But want to travel, spend time with my wife and family, and and see where it takes me. I don't know if I'll have a problem shutting it down, as they say. Could I be a consultant? Be available to folks? Sure, but I don't have a goal other than traveling and enjoying life once I stop working full time.
Hmm. When you stop, this,
Mm-hmm.
between now and then, when you stop, what's your game plan for the firm? You mentioned
Well,
growth.
yeah, absolutely. And it's growth not for growth's sake. It's grow to be better because I'm a firm believer that if a firm is not growing, the people in your firm, your teammates, they don't have the opportunity to take on new challenges, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
growing, it creates opportunity for people to advance. And I'm all about that. I want to create opportunities for our team to advance and challenge themselves and expand. I don't want people to have to go to another firm for an opportunity that we should have provided them here.
Mm.
And I'll go out uh, on that growth wave. Obviously, with our private equity partner, we have goals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as a family office private equity firm, it's very patient capital. There's no time frame hanging over the firm. We'll continue to invest in the firm and work together with them to grow it. We do have um, a place out there that we are aiming for, and my commitment is to get us there, right?
Mm.
Get us to that spot, and see where we take it after that. Um,
Mm.
but that's my goal. I'm really in my sweet spot, Pat. I love the M&A, merger and acquisition space.
Mm.
I love talking to my peers, other CEOs, and I probably spend 70% of my time in that space today,
Mm.
working hand in hand with Copley and some others. So the firm, I've got a chief operating officer, a chief financial officer, director of HR. The firm, I don't want to say runs itself, but I'm not involved in day-to-day operations, and that's a great place for me to be.
So you're focused on strategy and execution.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that
Mm-hmm.
simple: strategy and execution, and honoring the commitment that we made to our employees
Mm-hmm.
and the legacy of the firm and the founders, right? Bill Lockwood, Harold Jones, and John Beals. Um, this firm's got a lot of legacy, and private equity allowed us to retain that legacy, retain our name and our brand, and I'm going to honor that until my time here is done. So that's my game plan, and strategy is where I live. So that's where I will that's where I will be.
I'm in the habit of saying the hyphen is the most important punctuation mark. It's what comes between our date of birth and our date of death.
Yeah, it's I like that. Could I repurpose that?
Sure.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I didn't say steal. I said repurpose. I'll borrow that. I love borrowing great sayings, but you're so right. You're so right. Life goes fast, right? Life goes very very fast, and older people tell younger people that all the time. But until you're older, you just don't appreciate it.
So
You're
what
really,
what would you like people to know about you? What's important?
um, like I mentioned it earlier, that Rod left things better than when he started. Um, I had an incredibly strong work ethic, but I also had a lot of fun along the way. I think you know me well enough to know I don't take myself too seriously,
Hmm.
but I take my work very, very seriously. Um, I've traveled around the world, and it's kind of universal, right? People love to smile and laugh more than they like to frown and cry.
Hmm.
So let's have a little fun along the way, right? In that hyphen, let's have a little fun, and and uh, also that I really did dedicate much of my career to helping engineers who do great work and great things for this country and this world, how to communicate their value to clients and the public. And we have a long way to go. for the public to still appreciate that.
Amen. Thank you for your time.
Oh,
it was great to
thank
be
you,
with
Pat. Appreciate you asking. I don't know if it's fascinating, Pat, but it might be interesting, right?
You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We'll
Have
see
a great
you
day.
soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.